Michael, your analysis of what the two leaders had to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's fairly inevitable in a way, and interesting that the New Zealand Prime Minister mentions Gallipoli, because they always do. You know, it's often said that nations are forged in war, partly, and the New Zealand nation was partly forged in that dreadful catastrophe, 10-month-long catastrophe in 1915, but there it is. They were forged, the Anzacs were forged at Gallipoli. And that's what tends to happen. Both Prime Ministers said how grateful they were to the Interflex operation, both as they were praising the operation to help train Ukrainian soldiers and showing their commitment to Ukraine. But behind all of that, and behind all the predictability of what they said, really, and the thanks, and you would have expected all of that, is the idea that these are the non-American allies showing that they can work together, showing that they've got a lot between them and that they can do more, and they will do more. And the fact that the Syos factory or Syos plant in Hampshire is being given $35 million by the British, this is the New Zealand drones company, is indicative of what the British Army is going through now, because the British Army is trying to transform itself. And we'll hear a lot more about this when the Defence Review comes out in a few weeks' time, probably before the end of May. And that Defence Review is believed to say a great deal about transformation, which is actually making the army much more able to do its job with far fewer troops. And that will mean relying on very new technologies, procured and developed in a different way, and in a way taking a leaf out of the book of the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have shown, under extreme pressure, what you can do to become the #1 drone producer in the world, which is what they are. And we're trying to learn from that. And the idea that the British and New Zealanders will both be trying to transform their forces, given that they might find themselves fighting together, but more likely will find themselves operating apart in some military circumstances in the future. But they need to learn from each other and feed on each other in terms of the new technologies. So there's a message there in what was announced beyond the sort of ritualistic statements that the two Prime Ministers made.
The backdrop to all of this is that from a Western perspective, the United States is increasingly unreliable as a partner. But the reality is, from a NATO perspective, obviously New Zealand not part of NATO, but from a NATO perspective, the United States spends more than all of the other countries in NATO combined. It is huge militarily. But when it comes to conflict and war, what is more important? An expensive military or partners that you can rely on? And Christopher Luxon there referring to that 110-year-long relationship. Yeah. If you're fighting alongside somebody, what's the more important part? Is it the fact they've got the latest gun, or is it the fact that you know they'll turn up?
Well, it depends on the context, of course, but generally speaking, you would say it's alliances, it's partners. And British defence policy since 1945 has been based on the idea that we do not expect to fight alone, that we expect to fight with allies. Now, the only time we did fight alone was in the Falklands, and that was a pretty close-run thing. Sending 3,000 troops 8,000 miles away to liberate an island that was pretty close to Argentina. That was the only time. Every other assumption we have made is that we will fight with allies, and we still make that assumption, but it's now conditional upon the idea that it might not be with the United States, and that is a big problem for Europe. And but it is important that we get and stay close to our European allies, which is why we're on the verge of a European security treaty between Britain and the European Union, which will harmonise some of the things that were pushed apart with Brexit, get them back together again, at least in the security sphere. And again, we'll hear quite a lot more about that in the next month. And this arrangement with New Zealand is extending that, really, trying to make the most of our Commonwealth links. No other country has a Commonwealth, 46 different nations linked to the United Kingdom for historical reasons, including 1 or 2 nations that were never even part of the British Empire, like Rwanda. They wanted to join the Commonwealth because they thought it was a useful organisation to be in. It's quite hard to mobilise the Commonwealth completely to one particular thing. But parts of the Commonwealth, on certain issues, turn out to be remarkably resilient and remarkably useful. And most of us in the analysis business wish that we made greater effort to use it. And we should and we could. And that part of the Commonwealth, which relates to Australia, New Zealand, and the countries in the Pacific, and some of the islands in the Pacific, actually can be remarkably useful in the sort of circumstances we might be entering into in the late 2020s and 2030s.
And the outcome of 2 world wars could have had very different outcomes if it wasn't for the roles that many people played from the Commonwealth.
For sure. Britain could not have held on without the Commonwealth of Nations, as it then was, the dominions, behind it. The problem Britain had in 1939 is it couldn't win a short war, but it couldn't sustain a long one. So it held on and held on until 1941, when circumstances changed. And it could not have held on for those 2 years without the Commonwealth and the Empire behind it. That was critical.
Michael, fascinating stuff as ever. Appreciated. Michael Clarke there. Appreciate it.